Right now, we only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. And this new system that we're building is going to allow us to go beyond and hopefully take humans into the solar system to explore. So the moon, Mars, asteroids, there's a lot of destinations that we could go to, and we're building these building block components in order to allow us to do that eventually. We only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. We only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. The moon, Mars, asteroids, there's a lot of destinations that we could go to.
And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made from the White House. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you have done.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here.
A journey to another planet, a manned mission to Mars.
I should tell you that the first mission is scheduled to land on Mars on July the 4th, 1997, Independence Day.
We will undertake extended human missions to the moon as early as 2015, with the goal of living and working there for increasingly extended periods of time. Human missions to Mars and to worlds beyond.
But I just have to say, pretty bluntly here, we've been there before. There's a lot more of space to explore and a lot more to learn when we do. Now, last month we launched a new spacecraft as part of a re-energized space program that will send American astronauts to Mars.
We will establish a foundation for an eventual mission to Mars and perhaps someday to many worlds beyond. If we dare to dream big, and that's what our country is doing again. We're dreaming big.
This is what it means if they didn't go to the moon, and we're right that they lied about it. It means that the people controlling the government are not the Congress and not the Senate, that the CIA is running the country. And if they lied about the moon landings through their teeth, going to an elaborate scheme to do it, they will lie about anything and everything.
Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in. Join me as we take a walk down occult lane and cover a topic we've not covered very much in the past, and it's the topic of the moon landings. And before we begin, I just want to remind everybody that in 1968, the Club of Rome was formed, and its purpose was to create a crisis that would unite the world and condition us all to the idea of global solutions to local problems.
In a document called The First Global Revolution, authored by Alexander King and Bertrand Schneider, on pages 104 and 105, it stated, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers, of course, will be caused by human intervention that will require a global response." That's the origin of global warming, ladies and gentlemen.
And then UNESCO was formed, and its goal is to dumb us all down and make our children global citizens and hardcore humanists, removing God and all conversations about God from the schools. They've lied to us about vaccines, they've lied to us about 9/11, and I think they've probably lied to us about whether we ever really went to the moon. I'm very pleased to welcome Bart Sabrell. He's the producer and director of the 2001 film A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. He also produced Astronauts Gone Wild, an investigation into the authenticity of the moon landings. He was a contributor to the Fox special Conspiracy Theory, Did We Really Land on the Moon? You can find him on YouTube as Bart Sabrell and visit his website, sabrell.com. Bart, thanks for joining us.
How's it going, Sean?
It's going well. I'm really happy to have you on. You know, I watched your film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, many years ago, and I've watched it again since. I think it is just a fantastic documentary because, you know what? It forces people to use their critical thinking skills. And once you start to do that, you discover sound bites like this one. Let me play this, Bart, just to set the stage for our skeptics out there and the hardcore believers that believe much that they were told as children. This is from NASA's Eugene Kranz, who said they just don't have the telemetry data anymore.
I haven't seen anything that indicates the telemetry data is even in existence, and as I said, even if we had it, we don't have the machines to play it back.
But your own research has shown the telemetry data is missing.
That's right.
You know, I'll pause it there. Just explain to me what inspired you way back in 2001, before most any of us had even woken up to the New World Order and to all the lies. I mean, I think the CIA famously, one of the CIA officials famously once said, our mission will be complete once everything Americans believe is a lie. So what inspired you to make the film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon?
Well, I grew up as the biggest fan of the moon missions. My father was in the United States Air Force, and as an officer, he received a VIP package, press package of about 20 9x12 color prints of the first mission to the moon. I was about 4 years old at the time, asleep in bed, and a few weeks later, he got the package of pictures, gave them to me as a cherished present, and I had them on my wall. Every day I saw them, 365 days a year, times 10 years, over 3,600 times I looked at those pictures and believed we went to the moon. And then by the age of 14, 10 years later, I saw a television program with its guest, a gentleman by the name of William Casing, who worked for Rocketdyne. And because he was an editor of interdepartmental memos, he was one of the few people who saw the whole picture of the space program, departmentalization being one of the methods they use for secrecy. He was above that, had high security clearance, and he saw a memo that said the likelihood of going to the moon on the first attempt with 1960s technology and returning the men safely to Earth was about 1 in 10,000. So I, after the program, went to the bedroom wall, and sure enough, I looked at these pictures with new eyes. The important thing is that it caught me as an open-minded 14-year-old. And in order to see the truth, we have to be open-minded. In fact, one of the greatest stumbling blocks to perceiving the truth is our own pride. Pride blinds us from seeing the truth. And fortunately, this notion that the moon landings might have been falsified caught me open-mindedly. And I looked at the pictures, and sure enough, there were anomalies in the photographs, which I discuss in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. Then you add another 10 years to that. By the time I was 24, I had become a filmmaker. My job as a filmmaker is to make fake scenes look real. I even got complimented one day by a filmmaker with more experience than me, and he said, "Bart, I love the way you used the sunset out the window." And I said, well, that was actually an electrical light that we had mimicking the sun. So that's how I discerned that the pictures were not real, that they were lit in a television studio, because that's the craft that I worked with. And I can tell you even what kind of lighting they used, that it was not sunlight, it was electrical light, and it was this kind of electrical light. Well, there I am, 24 years old, editing a film one day for the producer of the TV show I'd seen 10 years earlier as a 14-year-old, whose guest said we didn't go to the moon. And I said, "Do you remember the guy who said that?" And he said, "No, I don't remember, but call the San Francisco production office." I called them up, and they said, "Good thing you called today, because we're about to delete all 10-year-old files, and you would have never been able to track down the guy." So I tracked him down, and already then I was thinking, Sean, if they didn't go to the moon, they might have killed this guy and had someone impersonate him so that whistleblowers would come to him and they could take care of that. So I even called him from a payphone across the street just to make sure I was being as cautious as possible. But within a few minutes, he had this great grandfatherly personality that I knew he was genuine. And he suggested that I do a film about it, being a filmmaker. Well, I paid my salary myself for about 6 months out of savings and did nothing but research how the shadows that should be parallel in sunlight intersect, sometimes at 90 degrees, how 2 of the 3 astronauts from the first mission rarely give interviews, how the administrator of NASA resigned days before the first mission, how the Soviets had launched the first satellite, the first animal, the first man, the first woman, the first spacewalk, the first crew of 3, all these firsts, 5 times amount of hours in space as the U.S., and they never went to the moon. And I started thinking, maybe the guy's right. I would say at that point, I estimated there was about a 1 out of 4 chance that the moon landings were fake. Seeing how it's the greatest event in history, next to creation and the Messiah coming, I'd say that's a dangerous possibility. Now, I have a relentless personality. I've always liked puzzles. I even drew mazes as a kid. And I said, if they didn't go to the moon, I'm the type of guy who could dig that up because I like puzzles and I'm relentless. So I actually, Sean, turned down the project for fear of my life. I said, if they didn't go to the moon, this could be dangerous looking into this. And I wanted to have a wife and family someday. And I said, why should I risk my life for someone else's folly years ago? So I actually turned down the project. Then another 5 years go by. I started reading the Bible at the request of a client who said, hey, if you read the Bible, I get this script of yours to a famous filmmaker. I picked up the 1-year Bible in 1989, and in 5 years, I had read the Bible 5 times. And I still wasn't a Christian, but I at least had a foundation that there is right and wrong, there is light and darkness, and there is a distinction between the two. And that if they didn't go to the moon, I realized, Sean, that that would be more profound of an event historically than if they'd actually gone. Let's say they could go, they could put a man on our closest planet, heavenly body to Earth, and come back, or they didn't go, they embezzled what would be now $150 billion, murdered people to keep it a secret, lied to Congress, lied to the Senate, lied to the scientific community, lied to the encyclopedias, and this is the government that claims to be the righteous light on a hill. If that happened, that would be more profound of an event historically than if they had actually gone. And I realized this might well be the case. And for the sake of history, like having a cure for cancer that's repressed, I said, I'm going to die anyway, and I might as well die for a purpose. So I changed my mind 5 years later. I started producing. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. We raised about $1 million to produce these films, and the financier of our films is right now a board member of an aerospace company building rockets for NASA, who wishes to remain anonymous. And he knows from an engineering point of view, the calculators that they had back then, the computer processing power, which is 1/1,000,000th that in all of NASA that a modern day cell phone could not calculate the trajectories and the synchronizing of the 2 rockets, mating, lifting off from the moon and mating with the spacecraft allegedly orbiting the moon.
Well, and not to mention, let me jump in and say, not to mention the impossibility of real-time communications at a distance of 240,000 miles. I mean, the point is that anybody with a cell phone who's lost signal knows that it would probably be very difficult with late 1960s technology to communicate in real time with a spacecraft 240,000 miles away, Bart.
Well, yeah, this investor who has an IQ in the range of Bill Gates and Einstein, who put up $1 million, who's right now building rockets for NASA, okay? He knows from an engineering point of view that they cannot go to the moon today, much less 50 years ago. The reason why they destroyed all the technology and all the blueprints and all the data that would have proved how they did it was to mask the fact that they didn't do it. So they're saying they spent $150 billion to go to the moon, and the rocket specifications to prove how they did it, they deliberately destroyed. The telemetry data to prove where the spacecrafts were, they deliberately destroyed. And all the original photographs and videotapes which would prove it, they deliberately destroyed. The fact that they destroyed it is proof that they didn't go, because if they really went, they would never destroy it. But if they falsified it and all that data and blueprints could prove the rocket didn't have enough fuel, the computers didn't have enough processing power, or the lunar module didn't have enough batteries, then they would destroy it, which is exactly what they did.
Yeah.
So the fact that they destroyed all that data.
Yeah, it speaks to the cover-up of a crime. I just want to give people sort of my top 5 anomalies that make me believe it's highly unlikely that men were sent to the moon. And in fact, this was a production sold to the American people and sold to the global population as massive propaganda. Here's the first one, the Van Allen radiation belts. And number 2, Bart, landing the lunar module.
Someone apparently forgot to create a burn crater underneath the lunar module's 10,000-pound thrust engine, despite the fact that during ground tests there was a real concern for the vehicle falling into the hole the engine created as it descended. Not even one speck of moon dust on the landing pod. As a result, all subsequent flights had to have the same discrepancy, which was explained away by the effect of no atmosphere.
And they were never able to land it successfully in tests on Earth. Number 3, the audacity of telling us they brought a rover, a dune buggy, to the moon. I mean, are you serious? They had this thing down so perfectly well, and it was so easy and so risk-free that they brought the extra added weight of a dune buggy so they could tool around on the moon. It's absolutely preposterous.
The cost of the 3 moon rovers in 21st century currency? Nearly $60 million each, though they had fewer parts than a Jeep. Where was all this money going?
Number 4, background mountains in many of these pictures are identical, and it's impossible for them to be identical. Here's one with the lunar module. And then here's the same mountain shown with no lunar module. And number 5, the Apollo 11 post-moon landing conference with Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, and Neil Armstrong, where it feels a lot more like a funeral than a hero's welcoming of 3 men that just landed on the moon.
When you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare?
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics. I don't recall during the period of time that we were photographing the solar corona what stars we could see.
I don't remember seeing any.
Those are sort of my top 5 anomalies that make me believe that there's more to the story, Bart.
Well, Sean, believe it or not, if you read this article, which you're going to link in your video, which is called Did They Really Walk on the Moon 48 years ago on the very first attempt? There is so much evidence in that article. Now, it's a lengthy article, and it has lots of video clips and references. There's so much more proof that they did not go than the fact that they claim that they did. And here's why. If you could name any time in world history, so we got, at least 6,000 years or more of civilization, if you can mention just one other time in which a milestone was met, like let's say first flight in 1903 by the Wright brothers, or crossing the Atlantic in 1927 by Lindbergh, or the atomic bomb in 1945, or breaking the sound barrier in 1947, or climbing Mount Everest, or going to the South Pole. If you could mention any other milestone in history that once it was broken, no one on Earth from any country was able to repeat it for 50 years. The only instance that has happened is the moon landings. Because if they could go to the moon on the very first attempt with 1960s technology, men would have been on Mars 25 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so illogical.
Absolutely.
It's unbelievable. It's like someone saying we split the atom, but we can't repeat it for 70 years. They're saying it's going to take 20 years from today to, quote, return to the moon. But their goal in the 60s was only 8 years. So with 50 years older technology, it only took them 8 years to go to the moon. And now with half a century, better rockets and computers, it's going to take them 20 years to go to the moon. The farthest they can go today is 1/1000th, as they claim to have gone 50 years ago, with 1/1,000,000th the computing power of a cell phone, with all that antiquated technology. It just is completely illogical. The only reason why people still believe we went to the moon, despite that obviousness, is because it's a positive conspiracy. I don't know of any other positive conspiracy. I mean, whoever killed JFK, he's dead. Whoever did 9/11, 3,000 people are dead. But this is a positive conspiracy. We went to the moon. America's great during the Nixon administration, during the Vietnam War protests, a distraction, a pep rally, something to feel good about. Your team won the Super Bowl. Well, what if I told you, Sean, your team, your hometown, they cheated to do it? You're ready to punch me in the face. And what if it's true? I mean, it's to me, it's so amazing. There's so much proof that they didn't go. compared to their acclaimed of the facts that they claimed they went to the moon, there's really no comparison.
Yeah. Well, let me back you up here. You know, cars have gotten more economical and more powerful. You know, certainly better since, you know, the Model T. Same with computers. They've become faster and more powerful and much smaller. We now have iPhones, as you said, in our pockets with more computing power than NASA had to send these astronauts to the moon. And here's NASA's Don Pettit saying, darn it, we'd love to go back to the moon, but we destroyed all the technology that got us there.
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
We destroyed that technology, Bart. It's a painful process to get it back, doggone it. Oh, shucks.
So let's pretend, Sean, that you believe we went to the moon. I'm going to help you win the debate. You tell me one other time in the entire history of the world when a new technology was developed and they deliberately destroyed it. See, then I go, hello, because it's never happened. There's never been a technology that a breakthrough was made, electricity or the telephone or the atomic bomb or putting a man on the moon. Oh, just that one. There's never been a time when a new technology was deliberately destroyed, except the technology to go to the moon. Because if they kept all the blueprints and all the schematics, you could prove scientifically that it was impossible. We have publications from von Braun himself. He's the guy who designed the rocket. And he said originally it would take 3 rockets, each taller than the Empire State Building, each weighing 800,000 tons to reach to the moon. And the Saturn V only weighed 2,500 tons.
Yeah.
It's a difference of 30,000%. And then he said you'd have to have a space station built first, ferry all of the extra fuel, and from there go to the moon. And then he said once you landed, you'd have to go into a cave because there would be a 50% chance every 24 hours of a catastrophic failure because of micrometeorites causing catastrophic decompression in the spacecraft or spacesuit. And they're leisurely walking around the moon for days and days, and no one ever had a micrometeorite. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable that they would bring a car to the moon and drive a distance away that they couldn't walk back in the event there was a failure in the mechanism. I mean, it's so preposterous. But people wanted to believe it. They wanted to believe in technology. They wanted to believe in America's great. And we're trying to take candy away from a baby here, Sean, in order to get people to see the truth. They don't want to give up their candy. I've talked to professors at universities who said if they saw an Apollo astronaut on national TV confess that it was fake, they would still believe that the missions were real.
Well,
they want to believe it so much.
We've been indoctrinated since children with this story. And you're right, it's a positive story. It's a patriotic story, and we want to believe it. But again, as I started this video, as I started this interview, just about everything we've ever been told has been a lie. So
think what it means if they didn't go and lied about it. Let's think about that for a minute. This is what it means if they didn't go to the moon, and we're right that they lied about it. It means our country, the United States of America, that we're genuinely patriotic for, being an honest country, a moral country, that they lied about the greatest accomplishment of mankind. They held ticker tape parades for these people. They gave them congressional medals of honor for lying. It means, because we know Congress and the Senate didn't vote for this, it means that the people controlling the government are not the Congress and not the Senate, that the CIA is running the country. And if they lied about the moon landings right in front of your eyes, through their teeth, going to an elaborate scheme to do it, they will lie about anything and everything.